The boardroom air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cold, corporate cruelty. My ribs screamed in protest as I tried to stand, my vision fracturing into jagged shards of light. I saw the smirks from the board members, men who saw my trembling as weakness, not survival. As my knees finally buckled, a wave of cruel laughter rippled through the room. They were waiting for me to hit the marble. They wanted to see me break. But the floor never came. Instead, the world turned silent as massive, tattooed hands caught me midair. The heat of his skin burned through my thin blouse. I looked up into the storm-dark eyes of Marco Edwards. The city's most dangerous man, the Mafia boss who never shows mercy, was kneeling on the floor, holding me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. The laughter died instantly. You could hear a pin drop as Marco's gaze swept the room, turning the air to ice. "Who laughed?" he whispered, his voice a lethal rumble that made grown men turn pale. When his eyes returned to mine, the fury vanished, replaced by a primal, terrifying possession. "I've got you, Tracy," he breathed. "And God help the man who made you this fragile." In that moment, my fate didn't just change, it was reclaimed. I went from a girl hiding bruises to the only woman under the protection of a monster. If you want to know how one collapse turned into a city-wide war for my soul, stay with me. But first, hit that subscribe button because in Marco's world, you're either with us or you're in the way. Tell me in the comments, is a possessive man a protector or a red flag? I read every single one. Now, let's go back to the day the air ran out. Before I tell you how my life ended and began in the same breath, I need to ask you something. If someone burned the world down just to keep you safe, would you call that love or a golden cage? Don't breathe. If I didn't breathe, the broken glass in my ribs wouldn't shift. Every tiny inhalation felt like a serrated blade scraping against my lungs. David, my manager, had made sure I learned my place in that dark parking garage 3 days ago. He didn't just want to hurt me, he wanted to own my fear. He told me that if I filed another HR complaint or looked at him with anything other than submission, the next time, I wouldn't walk away at all. He'd make sure I was buried where the city lights couldn't find me. I adjusted my high-collared silk blouse, checking the mirror one last time. The concealer was thick and heavy, a beige mask hiding the fingerprint-shaped bruises that bloomed like dark violets on my neck. I was the best logistics analyst in the city. I could track a shipment across 5 continents, navigate the most complex supply chains, and predict market crashes before they happened. I was a genius at moving pieces on a board, but I couldn't track my own escape. Today was the board meeting. The big one. If I could just get through this presentation for the Edwards Empire, I could finally vanish. I had the offshore account ready, the fake passport tucked into the lining of my briefcase, and a one-way ticket to a place where David Morrison couldn't reach. I just needed to stand tall for 60 minutes. Just 60 minutes of pretending the pain wasn't paralyzing me. But as I walked toward the penthouse elevator, my legs felt like lead weights. The gold-plated doors opened, and the air inside felt thin, like I was already ascending into a tomb. I gripped the handrail, my knuckles white, praying that my body wouldn't betray the secret I had worked so hard to bury. If I fell now, I'd never get back up. The Edwards boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, perched 60 floors above a city that looked like a playground for gods. The sunset was bleeding across the horizon, casting long, crimson shadows over the mahogany table. Tone, unfriendly. 20 men in $5,000 suits sat in high-backed leather chairs, their eyes like cold, polished stones. They didn't see people, they saw numbers, assets, and liabilities. At the head of the table sat Marco Edwards. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a predator who had allowed himself to be dressed in a tailored vest. The tattoos on his forearms, thick, black ink depicting ancient, coiled serpents reaching toward his knuckles, were the only thing that gave away his violent mafia roots. He was the king of this concrete jungle, and everyone in the room knew it. I stood at the podium to present the quarterly distribution routes. My voice was a ghost of itself, thin and reed-like. Every time I inhaled to speak, the room dimmed at the edges. The fluorescent lights hummed with an intensity that made my head throb. The distribution to the eastern ports is currently seeing a 12% increase. The sentence died in my throat. I felt a cold sweat break across my brow. Suddenly, I felt Marco's eyes lock onto mine. He wasn't looking at my charts or the digital display. He was looking at the way my hands were shaking. He was looking at the way I was leaning my weight off my left side. He was looking at the beads of sweat on my forehead that no air conditioning could chill. The floor beneath me suddenly moved, tilting like the deck of a ship in a storm. I reached out for the edge of the table, but my hand hit empty air. The world vanished into a terrifying, silent blackness as my knees finally gave out. The laughter hit me first. It was a sharp, jagged sound, high-pitched, mocking snorts from men who thought a woman in a boardroom was a decorative joke. Too much wine at lunch, Mayor? Or is the pressure finally getting to your head? Someone jeered, the sound echoing off the glass walls. I heard the scraping of chairs, the rustle of silk suits as they leaned back to enjoy the spectacle of my failure. I felt the cold, unforgiving marble of the floor rushing toward my face. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact that would surely shatter what was left of my dignity. But then, the air around me shifted. It smelled of expensive tobacco, aged whiskey, and the fresh scent of rain. Massive, rough hands caught my waist, pulling me against a chest that felt like a solid granite wall. It wasn't the floor that met me. It was the strongest embrace I had ever felt. Silence. Marco's roar echoed through the 60-story tower like a thunderclap. The laughter was cut so fast it was like a physical blow to the room. Marco Edwards, the man who makes governors tremble and rivals disappear, was kneeling on the floor. He didn't care about his expensive suit or the optics of the meeting. He was cradling me in front of everyone. "I've got you, Tracy," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing vibration against my ear. His hands were truly huge, covering my trembling ones completely, grounding me back to reality. I looked past his shoulder and saw his eyes shift back to the men at the table. The warmth he showed me was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory intent. It wasn't a business meeting anymore. It was a death warrant. He looked at every man who had left, memorizing their faces for a reckoning they weren't prepared to survive. The boardroom was empty now. Marco had cleared it in 10 seconds flat with a single, lethal look that promised violence to anyone who lingered. Now, I was laying on a deep velvet sofa in his private inner sanctum. The room was dim, lit only by the dying orange glow of the city skyline. He was kneeling again, but this time, he wasn't just holding me. He had a black first aid kit open on the glass coffee table. "Lift the shirt, Tracy." The command was quiet, but it brooked no refusal.
"No."
"I'm fine, Marco. I just haven't eaten," I gasped, clutching the fabric of my blouse as if it were armor. He didn't ask a second time. His fingers, gentle but as unyielding as iron, bypassed my weak grip and raised the silk hem. He heard his breath hitch in the silence. A low, guttural growl vibrated deep in his chest, a sound that was more animal than man, as he saw the truth. The purple, yellow, and black marks David had left on my ribs were a grotesque map of cruelty. "Who?" he asked. The word was so quiet it sent a shiver of pure ice down my spine. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. "It doesn't matter, Marco. He's powerful in the company. He's connected." Marco stood up abruptly, his massive, tattooed frame blotting out what was left of the sunset. The room felt smaller with him standing at his full height. "He is a corpse," Marco corrected, his jaw tight enough to snap bone. "He just hasn't stopped breathing yet. From this second, you aren't an employee of this company. You are mine, and I protect what is mine with everything I am." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the Mafia boss. I was afraid for the man who had touched me. Marco is officially on the warpath. Do you think his protection is romantic, or is he just another man trying to control her? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for the showdown. The next morning, the corporate headquarters felt like a ghost town. The air was heavy with unspoken questions, but the usual office gossip had been strangled by a thick layer of fear. David Morrison's desk was empty, his computer gone, and his personal belongings trashed in a nearby bin. The rumor in the break room was that he had been relocated in the middle of the night by men who didn't wear badges. I sat in Marco's private office, perched on a leather chair that made me feel small. I was wrapped in one of his oversized black hoodies, the scent of his cologne acting as a protective shield. He was standing by the window on the phone, his voice a lethal, rhythmic drone. I don't care who his father is or what favors he's owed. If David Morrison is still within the city limits by sunset, bring me his head in a box. Do you understand? He hung up the phone and turned toward me. His expression softened into something unrecognizable, a look of genuine concern that didn't belong on a man who ordered hits for breakfast. You're safe here, Tracy. I've placed my best men at your apartment to secure your documents. Your things are being moved to my penthouse as we speak. You won't return to that place again. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. This was the protection I had prayed for during those long, dark nights, but now I was moving into the lion's den itself. Marco Edwards wasn't just a boss. He was the law in the city. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and wondered if I was actually escaping a monster, or if I was just trading a small, cruel devil for a massive, possessive king who would never let me go. I realized then that the meeting had never really ended. It had just changed venues. Life in the penthouse was a fever dream composed of Egyptian silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and silent guards standing like statues at every door. Every night, Marco would come into the guest suite. He would sit at the edge of the bed, never touching me, just watching me sleep with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He was a man accustomed to war, and I was the only thing in his world that represented peace. "Why do you care so much?" I asked one night, the moonlight silvering the tattoos on his arms. "I was just an analyst to you." He reached out slowly, his thumb tracing the curve of my jawline with a gentleness that broke my heart because I've spent my entire life taking things, Tracy. I've destroyed rivals, seized territories, and broken souls. For once in my life, I want to keep something whole. I want to see you stand without pain. But the peace of the penthouse was a fragile lie. In the underworld, silence is often the sound of a gathering storm. A rival family, the Vancinis, had been looking for a crack in Marco's armor for years. They knew he had a weakness now. They knew he was distracted by a woman with bruised ribs and a broken spirit. I was standing by the window, looking at the city lights, when I saw it. A tiny, pulsating red appeared on the glass, dancing right over Marco's heart as he walked toward me. The world slowed down. My heart stopped. "Marco, get down," I screamed, lunging for him with every bit of strength I had left. I didn't care about my ribs anymore. I didn't care about the pain. I only cared that the man who caught me was about to be taken away. We hit the floor just as the first suppressed round hissed through the air. Things just got real. Tracy just saved the boss. Is she finally a partner, or still a liability? Drop a like if you're hooked, and subscribe to see Marco's revenge in the climax. The glass didn't shatter. Marco had reinforced the entire penthouse with military-grade bulletproof shielding, but the message was louder than an explosion. They were coming for us. They were inside the perimeter. Marco didn't flinch, didn't panic, and didn't hesitate. He just reached under the marble coffee table, pulled out a matte black Glock, and handed me a smaller, sleek silver pistol. "Go to the panic room. Now. Dante is already there waiting for you," he commanded, his eyes turning into chips of dark glass. "No. I am tired of hiding, Marco. I spent years hiding from David, hiding from my debt, hiding from my own life." I looked at the intricate serpents on his arms, then directly into the fire in his eyes. I realized in that moment that I didn't want to be protected like a porcelain doll anymore. I wanted to fight beside the man who had knelt for me. I gripped the cold metal of the gun, feeling its weight anchor me. I wanted the Vancinis to know that Marco Edwards wasn't the only dangerous person in this room. "Show me how to use it," I demanded, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. Marco paused, his finger on the trigger of his own weapon. A dark, proud smirk touched his lips, the look of a king who had finally found his queen. "That's my girl," he whispered, the pride in his voice more intoxicating than any drug. "Keep your eyes open and stay behind me. Let's show these vultures what happens when they try to touch an Edwards. Let's show them that even when we're cornered, we're the ones who hunt." The elevator dings, signaling the arrival of the first hit squad. The war had officially moved into our living room, and I was ready to draw blood. The elevator doors hissed open with a mechanical whine, and the first wave of Vancini's men burst through like a dam breaking. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of luxury, instantly transformed into a jagged battlefield of fire and lead. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark office like strobe lights in a nightmare. The air became thick with the smell of gunpowder and the ozone of spent rounds. I dove behind the massive mahogany desk, the same desk I used to present boring reports on. I could hear the heavy thud of bullets hitting the wood above my head. Through the chaos, I saw a shadow moving stealthily toward Marco's blind side while he was pinned down by two shooters near the balcony. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wait for permission. I leaned out and fired the silver pistol exactly the way Marco had shown me in those frantic seconds before. The man went down with a heavy thud. Marco turned his head, his eyes widening with genuine shock for a split second, before they began burning with a dark, primal heat. He didn't say a word, but the nod he gave me was everything. He moved through the drifting gun smoke like a god of war, clearing the room with surgical precision. He didn't miss. He didn't falter. Within minutes, the only sound left was the ringing in our ears and our own heavy, synchronized breathing. He reached for me, pulling me up from behind the desk and crashing his mouth onto mine. The kiss tasted like copper, adrenaline, and absolute victory. I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. And as I looked at the carnage around us, I knew there was no going back to the girl who had fainted in a boardroom. That girl was dead, and this new version of me was far more dangerous. Monday morning, the boardroom. The sun was rising again, but the atmosphere was entirely different. I walked in first this time, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor like a ticking clock. No concealer. No high collars. My bruises were fading into yellow ghosts, but my scars were mine to keep, badges of honor from a war they couldn't imagine. I walked straight to the head of the table and sat at the right hand of Marco Edwards. The board members who had laughed and sneered weeks ago couldn't even meet my eyes. They stared at their tablets, their hands shaking as they realized the power dynamic had shifted forever. Marco stood up slowly, his massive, tattooed hands resting heavily on the mahogany table. He looked like a king surveying his subjects. "Effective immediately, meet your new director of strategic operations," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of a decree. "Tracy Mayer now speaks with my voice. Her decisions are my decisions. Her orders are my orders." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a lethal, bone-chilling whisper that made the air in the room turn to ice. "And if anyone in this room, or this city, has a problem with her leadership, her past, or the way she sits at this table..." He paused, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of dissent. "You can discuss it with me personally, in private." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city spread out below us. I had fallen at this meeting once, broken and alone. But today, I was exactly where I belonged, standing at the side of the man who saw my worth when I was at my lowest. So, I have to ask you one last time, did I choose the monster, or did the monster choose me? Let me know your final verdict in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for the next story.